Thank you very much. This debate here is not about left versus right in politics. I may be UKIP, but I'm on the same side as Baroness Jenny Jones from the Greens, Conservatives like David Davis, who share platforms with Labour MPs like Gisela Stewart, or stalwarts of Labour like Dennis Skinner and the great late Tony Benn. I'm honoured to be speaking alongside Labour's Kate Hoy next week, who also wants Brexit, and we've got businesses like JCB and Dyson on our side because they recognise what being members of the European Union is doing to British business. I'm a member of the European Parliament, and every month the entire Parliament packs its bags and it moves from Brussels in Belgium to Strasbourg in France and then back again. After just 4 days, the whole cost of that moving is £130 million a year, and who knows what the carbon emissions of that are. We like to call it the travelling circus. We'd like to stop it. We'd like to only have the European Parliament in one place, but guess what? We don't have the power. We've voted 4 times in the last couple of months to end the travelling circus, but we can't. We have the most toothless European Parliament. It's the most toothless Parliament in the history of parliaments. I can't think of any other parliament in the world that doesn't even have the power to decide where it sits. And the problem is that the power resides with the unelected European Commission, who drive forward the legislation, not with the European Parliament, which is basically a rubber stamping chamber. But I'm not going to say too much about democracy in my opening, because whether you prefer our laws to start in Westminster or in Brussels, whether you prefer an elected government or unelected European commissioners, I think most people know already what they think on that. On immigration, whether you want controlled immigration from 167 countries, but a complete free-for-all from the 27 other EU countries, or whether you want a fair system which treats every country the same, whether you're from Poland or Paraguay, from Spain or Senegal, again, most people know already what they think. Whether you believe that the EU kept the peace in Europe, or whether you think that's giving them credit for time travel, suggesting they kept peace before they even existed. And actually, you might think that NATO is the organisation which kept the peace when there was a real threat in Europe at the time of the Cold War. But again, I think most people already have made their minds up whether they believe that was the EU or NATO. Whether you believe the EU gives us workers' rights, or whether you believe that there's a reason that the UK has stronger rights in almost every area than the EU asks us to have. And that reason is democracy. Again, people generally know what they think. But by the way, if Brexit did truly threaten workers' rights, why is it that unions like the RMT, ASLEF and the Bakers Union are on my side? Whether you believe we have influence as one small voice as part of a club of 28, or whether you believe we'd be stronger as an independent nation regaining our vote at the World Trade Organization, as a member of the Security Council, the G7 and the G20, again, you probably already know what you think about that. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the economy today, not from this little European protectionist mindset, but from a global perspective. So let me now take you around the world to show what's going wrong because we're members of the European Union. And it starts with this. We cannot negotiate our own trade deals. We do not have the power. Since 1975, the EU Trade Commissioner has to negotiate our deals for us. So if there's a problem with trading outside the European Union, it's because our own Parliament, our own government don't have the power to make our own trade deals. And it's holding us back from trading with those other 6.5 billion people, whilst we trade with just those 500 million. We should be doing more for the rest of the world. Let's start with the United States, where the proposed EU-US trade deal, known as TTIP, proposes allowing American companies to sue the British government. It proposes allowing the NHS to be opened up to competition for American companies. Now, I'm not even allowed, as a member of the European Parliament, to see that trade deal, unless I go into a secure reading room, hand over my mobile phone, and I can go in there as long as I promise not to tell anyone what it says. The whole thing is a disaster. The UK have had bits that we want taken out of it at the request of the French. You see, that's the problem. 28 countries have to all agree just to get our negotiating position to negotiate with America. Or you could look at Canada. A free trade deal that's taken 9 years to complete is held up because of a completely unrelated argument about Romania and visas. Let's move to Africa, where some of the world's poorest countries, who we should be helping through free and fair trade, the EU imposes punitive tariffs on them. So, for example, a 1% tariff on the import of cocoa, but a 30% tariff on the import of processed chocolate. The result, we make it harder for those countries to develop jobs, to develop their economies, to do those jobs in those countries, to export to us, to gain money which they can then use to buy things in, and we keep them pushed down. That's why Oxfam in 2008 put them at the top of their double standards index for helping with one hand and pushing back with the other. In countries like Malawi, EU rules on pesticides make it harder to control the mosquito population, and that puts the rates of diseases like malaria up. Let's look at India, where trade relations are again stalled over completely unrelated reasons. There's a market of over 1 billion people there. We should be tapping into it with a free trade agreement. And the State Bank of India has openly called for Brexit, because we've got historical links with India, and we could develop our trade with India if only we had the power to do so. What about China? Even Iceland, tiny country, population less than that of Sheffield. Iceland's got a free trade deal with China. Iceland's not in the EU. It could negotiate it. We can't, because the EU would have to do it for us. We don't have the power. And by the way, just remember, China and America combined are double the size of the 27 countries in the EU all put together. The Remain campaign keeps saying that the EU is the world's largest trading bloc. Well, that's only true if you think two things. One, if you include the UK in that figure, and two, if you forget to take into account the fact it was overtaken last year by a single country. Let's look at South Korea and Australia. They've got the kind of trade deals with the EU that the Remain campaign is telling us we'd never be able to get. Access to trade with a single market, mutual recognition of standards. Hang on a second. Let's look at the treaties. Article 8 of the Lisbon Treaty that we signed with them. Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty says that the EU will work together with us in a spirit of neighbourliness and cooperation. That's what we want. We want to be good neighbours with Europe. We don't want European government. And so when they suggest that we'll somehow get a worse deal than Australia has, despite the fact that Australia is on the other side of the world and the UK has the world's 5th largest economy, I say that's nonsense. And then we come to Syria and the refugee crisis. But the EU's little European mindset is again making things worse. The most vulnerable people are those in the refugee camps in Jordan, in Lebanon, in Turkey. And so when the Commission makes misguided statements that result in large numbers of people crossing from country to country, paying smugglers, and generally you end up with the richer, able-bodied young men making the long journeys, and the people who are the most vulnerable, the women, the children, the elderly, the poor, the destitute, they are the people who are stuck back in those refugee camps, and that's where we should be doing a lot more to help, but the European Commission has so badly mismanaged it. Closer to home, look at Norway. It's not in the EU, but it prospers. It's got a bad deal with the EU, yes. But still, 70% of people in Norway don't want to join the European Union. They know they're better off outside. Greece and Iceland both suffered bad financial crises. Greece is still stuck in it. It's trapped in the Euro straitjacket. Iceland has recovered and now once again prospers. Indeed, Iceland's Prime Minister explained that's why Iceland was able to recover. We could look at Liechtenstein, which is smaller than Rotherham and has the single market and limits immigration, which Remain say is impossible. We're a bit bigger than Liechtenstein. I think we can get a better trade deal than they can. Switzerland recently voted to withdraw its application to join the EU. The MP, Lucas Reimann, in Switzerland, who withdrew that application, who proposed that motion, said, these days Switzerland is called Britzeland because we wish the British people all the best for the Brexit. And of course 70% of people in Switzerland don't want to join the EU either. Even the chairman of Britain Stronger in Europe admitted to the Treasury Select Committee that we could get a better deal than Norway, Switzerland, Liechtenstein or Iceland. Well, no surprise there, is there? Because we're more than 4 times the size of all those countries put together. Of course we can get a better deal than they have. Of course we can develop our place in the wider world. So, ladies and gentlemen, the choice is clear. An outdated 1950s little European customs union, which has gone down from 30% of world trade to 16.5% and is still falling. Or we can open our minds to the fact that there's a wider world out there, and we can look at the 6.5 other billion people in the world, many of whom in the Commonwealth we have shockingly neglected over the last 43 years. And actually, let's look and see whether there's a brighter future for us being good friends with Europe, but regaining our place in the wider world and trading with it as well. Thank you.